A language can be a perfect mystery, with no family and no known origin. This video is about those isolated ancient languages, the ones that defy every attempt to connect them to our story. You will gain a new understanding of human prehistory, seeing it not as a clear map but as a puzzle with missing pieces. How did a single tongue survive in Europe for thousands of years while every language around it changed? And what can a hunter-gatherer's last words tell us about a world before nations? By the end, you will see these languages not as dead ends, but as windows into lost chapters of our collective past. What does it mean for a way of speaking to be truly alone in the world? Think of the world's languages as a great, sprawling forest. Most stand in familiar groves, their trunks connected by ancient roots hidden deep beneath the surface. This is the Indo-European family, a single ancestral tongue that gave rise to English, Spanish, Hindi, and Russian, its branches stretching across continents. Over there is the Sino-Tibetan grove, Tibetan, the Afro-Asiatic family with Arabic and ancient Egyptian. These are the stories we know, the lineages we can trace. Their connections tell a grand narrative of human migration, contact, and shared history. But what about a tree that stands utterly alone, not a sapling, but a mighty, ancient oak, with no other trees around it that share its same root system? In the science of language, this is not a metaphor. It is a specific and profoundly puzzling category known as a language isolate. An isolate is not a dialect or a mere curiosity. It is a full, complex language that, after centuries of the most rigorous analysis, shows no demonstrable genealogical relationship to any other language on Earth. Linguists do not declare this lightly. The process involves comparing core vocabulary, grammatical structures, and sound systems, searching for patterns of systematic correspondence that point to a common ancestor. When those patterns are utterly absent, when every bridge of logic collapses, the language is classified as isolated. It is a verdict of profound historical solitude. This foundational idea transforms our journey from a general theory into a specific hunt for ghosts. We are no longer looking for obscure branches. We are searching for entire trees that grew from seeds we cannot find, in a part of the forest we never knew existed. That profound solitude is not a hypothetical idea. It has a name and a home. High in the Pyrenees mountains, where the rugged border between modern Spain and France carves through ancient rock, a language has held its ground for thousands of years. This is Basque, known to its speakers as Euskara. To hear it is to step into a different layer of European history, one that predates the Romans, the Celts, and every wave of Indo-European migration that shaped the continent's linguistic map. Surrounded by Spanish and French, languages with clear, sprawling family trees, Basque stands utterly alone. Its grammar, its structure, its core vocabulary resist every attempt to link them to any known linguistic family on Earth. Linguists, after centuries of study, have a term for such a phenomenon. They call it a living fossil. This is not a casual label. It means Basque may be the sole surviving descendant of the languages spoken by Europe's very first inhabitants, people who were here long before the ancestors of the English, the Italians, or the Greeks ever arrived. When you listen to Euskara, you might be hearing a distant echo of the world that existed when artists painted breathtaking scenes of bison and horses on the walls of caves like Altamira. It is a direct linguistic connection to a Paleolithic Europe that is otherwise silent. The survival of Basque is a story of geography and sheer human will. The Pyrenees acted as a natural fortress, but the true fortress was the community itself. For millennia, through the rise and fall of empires, through conquest and cultural pressure, Basque speakers maintained their unique way of speaking. It became more than communication. It became the bedrock of identity, a symbol of cultural endurance that refused to be assimilated. So here, in the very heart of a continent crisscrossed by known historical pathways, we have our first concrete evidence that entire chapters of the human story can be preserved in a single, resilient tongue. If Basque survived here against all odds, what other linguistic relics might be waiting in other forgotten corners of the world? But the story of linguistic isolation is not confined to the ancient mountains of Europe. Far to the east, in the soaring, glacier-carved valleys of the Karakoram and Hindu Kush ranges, another language stands as a monument to human resilience and mystery. This is Burushaski, spoken by the Burusho people in the breathtaking landscapes of northern Pakistan, in places like the legendary Hunza Valley. If Basque sounds like a whisper from Ice Age Europe, Burushaski feels like a song from the roof of the world. Its sound is melodic and complex, a flowing stream of syllables that has captivated and confounded linguists for over a century. The language possesses grammatical features found almost nowhere else. For instance, it has a four-gender system, categorizing nouns not just as masculine or feminine, but in ways that seem tied to the ancient, animistic worldview of its speakers, distinguishing humans from animals and countable objects from intangible forces. This is not a simple dialect of the languages around it. It is an entirely different universe of thought encoded in speech, and that is the central puzzle. Burushaski is an island in a sea of known linguistic families. To its south are languages of the mighty Indo-European family, like Urdu and Shina. To its east, across the high passes, are tongues from the Sino-Tibetan family. Yet Burushaski shares no proven genealogical link with any of them. It is, like Basque, a perfect isolate. This profound disconnect has led scholars on long intellectual journeys, searching for lost relatives across vast distances. One of the most intriguing, though still unproven, theories is the Karasuk hypothesis. This idea suggests a possible, ancient connection between Burushaski and languages once spoken by nomadic peoples in southern Siberia, thousands of miles to the north. The link is tenuous, based on fragments of grammatical structure and a handful of vocabulary words, but it paints a haunting picture. It proposes that the ancestors of the Burusho people might have undertaken an epic, forgotten migration, carrying their unique language with them into the Himalayan fastnesses, where it was preserved while its relatives vanished from the earth. Today, field linguists work urgently in these valleys, documenting Burushaski's rich oral traditions, epic poems, historical narratives, and folk tales that are a treasure trove of cultural memory. Their work is driven by a dual purpose: to unravel a scientific mystery and to preserve a unique voice against the pressures of a changing world. The survival of Burushaski shows us that extreme geography, these remote vertical valleys, can act as a perfect linguistic greenhouse, sheltering a way of speaking for millennia. It forces us to ask where else on our planet such towering, isolating landscapes might be hiding other singular, untranslatable pieces of the human story. The story of linguistic isolation finds its most fragile and perhaps most urgent chapter not in a mountain fortress, but in the memory of a single person. In the lowland forests of western Nepal, for decades, the fate of an entire language rested almost entirely with one remarkable woman. Her name was Jayani Maya Sen. Until her passing not long ago, she was one of the last known fluent speakers of Kusunda, a language that stands as a profound mystery in the Himalayan foothills. Her life and her knowledge represented a living bridge to a world that has all but vanished. The Kusunda people were traditionally nomadic hunter-gatherers, known as the Ban Roja, or kings of the forest. Their language, perfectly adapted to that life, is a lexicon of the wilderness. It contains distinct, precise words for tracking animals, for identifying plants, for the subtle signs of the forest that would be invisible to an agricultural society. This was not just a tool for communication. It was an encoded map of an entire way of being, a philosophy of living in harmony with a specific ecosystem. And linguistically, it is a world unto itself, surrounded by the vast Tibeto-Burman language family and the influential Indo-Aryan languages like Nepali. Kusunda shares no meaningful connection with any of them. Its sound system includes rare consonants not found in neighboring tongues, and its grammar operates on principles that linguists struggle to categorize. It is not a dialect, not a branch. It is unmistakably another isolate. The urgency surrounding Kusunda is palpable. For years, dedicated linguists and anthropologists worked closely with Jayani Maya Sen and the few other remaining elders, racing against time to document every possible word, story, and grammatical rule. They recorded not just vocabulary lists, but songs, personal histories, and descriptions of traditional practices. This work was an act of scientific rescue, aiming to preserve the blueprint of a unique human mind before the final door closed. The case of Kusunda introduces a deeply sobering dimension to our exploration. These ancient, isolated languages are not merely academic puzzles. They are often critically endangered, whispering on the very brink of silence. When a language like Kusunda is lost, we do not just lose a set of words. We lose a unique way of categorizing reality, a specific body of environmental knowledge refined over millennia, and an irreplaceable thread in the vast tapestry of human imagination. Each isolate that fades away is like a library burning down, and we have only managed to save a few scattered pages. This reality forces a difficult question. If these lone languages are windows into humanity's deepest past, what happens when the last keeper of the view is gone? The quiet rustle of birch bark and the scent of wood smoke carry a different kind of mystery in the northern forests of Japan. On the island of Hokkaido, and once across the Kuril Islands and Sakhalin, the Ainu people developed a culture profoundly connected to the natural world, renowned for intricate textile patterns and ceremonial practices honoring the spirits of animals like the bear. Yet woven into this rich cultural fabric is a linguistic enigma that stands completely apart. The Ainu language shares no genealogical roots with Japanese, Korean, or any of the Altaic languages proposed by some scholars. It is another world, another way of thinking, preserved on the very islands that gave rise to one of the world's most influential cultures. The structure of Ainu is what linguists call polysynthetic. This means that ideas we would express with a full sentence in English are often conveyed in a single, densely packed word. A verb can contain within it not just the action, but the subject, the object, and even subtle nuances of how the action is performed. It is a language built for efficiency and deep contextual meaning, a perfect tool for a society with a rich oral tradition of epic poetry, known as Yukar, that recounted the journeys of gods and cultural heroes. For much of modern history, however, this voice was systematically suppressed. As Japan modernized, official policies actively discouraged the use of Ainu, promoting assimilation and leading to a steep decline in speakers. This part of the story is a stark reminder that the survival of a language is not just a matter of geography or time. It is often a matter of politics and cultural pressure. The isolation of Ainu was not merely a linguistic accident. It was compounded by social forces that pushed it to the brink of silence. Yet, in recent decades, a powerful movement of revitalization has taken root. Driven by Ainu communities and supported by new legal recognitions, there is a growing effort to teach the language, to record its stories, and to reclaim it as a vital pillar of identity. This journey from near erasure to revival challenges the common perception of Japan as a monolingual society, revealing a deep, ancient stratum of human history in East Asia that predates the arrival of the Yamato people. The story of Ainu compels us to look at other regions with complex histories, to wonder what other indigenous voices, what other isolated ways of seeing the world, might lie just beneath the surface of a dominant national story, waiting for the moment to speak again. Yet another layer of this mystery lies hidden in the dusty, sun-baked landscapes of central India. In the state of Maharashtra, far from the high mountain valleys and dense forests, a different kind of linguistic ghost whispers. This is the Nihali language, and it presents a puzzle so complex it has been called a linguistic detective story with half the pages missing. Spoken by a small community, Nihali exists as a perfect language island. For generations, its speakers have been surrounded by powerful linguistic currents, the Munda languages, part of the larger Austroasiatic family, and the ancient Dravidian languages like Telugu and Marathi. Yet, at its very core, Nihali's most basic vocabulary, the words for body parts, for simple actions, for fundamental elements of the world, shows no clear relationship to any of them. It is as if the foundation of the language is built from entirely different materials. The most compelling theory is that Nihali may be a surviving fragment, a last echo, of the languages spoken by the Indian subcontinent's very first inhabitants. These would be communities that arrived tens of thousands of years ago, long before the migrations that brought Dravidian and later Indo-Aryan speakers to the region. If this is true, then Nihali is not just an isolate, it is a potential window into a human history in India that is otherwise completely silent, a prelude to all the epic stories the subcontinent is known for. But studying Nihali is an extraordinary challenge, and this is where the story becomes a race against a different kind of time. The language has historically been used by its speakers as a kind of secret code, a private way of communicating that outsiders could not understand. This deliberate secrecy, a tool for cultural preservation in itself, means that for a long time, linguists struggled to even hear the language spoken freely. Furthermore, like so many other unique tongues, the number of fluent speakers is declining as younger generations adopt more widely used languages for daily life. This combination of factors makes Nihali a fragile and elusive subject. What makes Nihali a special case, even among isolates, is how it has adapted. Over centuries of contact, it has borrowed massive amounts of vocabulary from its Munda and Dravidian neighbors. You can think of it not as a pure, untouched stream, but as a river that has flowed through many lands, picking up stones and silt along the way. The original bedrock is still there, but it is now covered in layers of borrowed material. For a linguist, this turns the work into an archaeological dig. They must carefully sift through these layers of loanwords, trying to distinguish what is borrowed from what is original, searching for that elusive native core. Nihali stands as a powerful reminder that languages are not static relics. They are living, breathing entities that absorb and change, even as they cling to a unique inner identity. It shows us that the deepest mysteries are often the most camouflaged, hiding in plain sight, waiting for a patient listener to discern the ancient signal beneath the modern noise. The sheer stubbornness of these languages, their refusal to fit into any family tree, forces us onto a new battlefield. This is the world of linguistic forensics, where scholars are not just translators but detectives, armed with a powerful tool called the comparative method. It is a meticulous, almost mathematical process. Linguists search for systematic sound correspondences between languages. Think of it like a code. If the word for water in one ancient language is water and in another it is water, and you see a pattern where T in the first consistently corresponds to D in the second across dozens of core words, you have a strong clue of a shared ancestry. This method has built the grand language families we know, but with isolates, it hits a silent, imposing wall. You can compare Basque to Latin, to Celtic, to any language from Europe or beyond, and those systematic correspondences simply do not appear. The core vocabulary words for mother, father, son, fire shares no recognizable pattern. It is like trying to solve a jigsaw puzzle with pieces from entirely different boxes. The shapes do not interlock, the colors do not match. Faced with these dead ends, some researchers have turned to broader, more controversial techniques. One is mass comparison, which involves looking at large sets of vocabulary across many languages at once, searching for any superficial resemblances. The problem is, this method is notoriously prone to false positives. By chance alone, any two languages in the world might share a handful of words that sound similar. Without the rigorous, systematic proof of the comparative method, these links are mirages. More recently, computational phylogenetic methods have entered the fray. These are algorithms similar to those used to trace virus mutations or map the evolution of species, applied to language data. They can process thousands of vocabulary items and grammatical features, searching for statistical signals of a deep relationship. Sometimes they offer tantalizing hints, a faint, ghostly link between, say, Burushaski and that ancient Siberian language family, but these results are often inconclusive. They suggest a possibility, a whisper from the deep past, but not the kind of proof that would rewrite the textbooks. They highlight the immense depth of time we are dealing with, periods so long that the normal threads connecting languages have completely frayed away. This leads to a crucial distinction in the detective's toolkit: typology versus genealogy. Typology is about comparing the structure of languages, their grammar, their sound systems, how they build sentences. You might note that both Basque and some languages of the Caucasus have complex verb systems. That is a typological similarity. Genealogy, however, is about proving a common descent. It requires that shared, inherited material, that unbroken chain of words passed down from a single mother tongue. An isolate might share typological features with its neighbors simply because of centuries of contact and borrowing, not because they are family. This is why the mystery remains. The failure to classify these languages is not for lack of effort or ingenuity. It is a humbling realization. The time separating an isolate like Nihali or Kusunda from its lost relative may be so profound 10,000 years, 15,000, perhaps even longer, that all the usual linguistic evidence has simply evaporated. The very depth of their solitude is what makes them so significant. Each one is not a missing piece of a known puzzle, but a signal that entire other puzzles once existed. Their boxes lost to time, leaving only these single, enigmatic pieces behind for us to ponder. This brings us to a fundamental barrier, a horizon line beyond which even the sharpest linguistic detective cannot see. It is called time depth. Every method of tracing language ancestry, from the comparative method to the newest computational models, has a theoretical expiration date. Linguists estimate that beyond roughly 8 to 10,000 years, the systematic connections between languages, the shared sounds, the core vocabulary, erode to the point of being indistinguishable from random chance. The evidence simply washes away. Words change, sounds shift, grammar evolves, and over such vast stretches, the original blueprint can become completely obscured. This is not a failure of science, but a recognition of its limits. It is like trying to identify a specific tree by examining a handful of dust that was once its leaves. The material is there, but the structure that gave it meaning is gone. So what does this mean for our isolated languages? It forces a profound shift in perspective. We must stop thinking of Basque, Burushaski, Kusunda, and the others as mere oddities, as single trees that inexplicably sprouted alone. Instead, consider a different possibility. What if each one is not a solitary tree, but the last surviving member of an entire forgotten forest? Each isolate we see today could be the final, lingering echo of a language family that was once widespread, spoken by thriving communities across a region. These families flourished perhaps for thousands of years, and then were gradually displaced, absorbed, or fragmented by the great migratory waves we do know about the spread of Indo-European. the expansion of Sino-Tibetan, the movements of agricultural peoples. The survivors, like Basque holding its Pyrenean redoubt, are not the exceptions, they are the last witnesses. This idea transforms the map of human prehistory. The world 8 or 10,000 years ago was not a silent, empty stage waiting for the known language families to arrive. It was likely a vibrant, complex mosaic of many different ways of speaking, a rich linguistic landscape that has been almost completely painted over by the movements that followed. The isolates are the tiny, stubborn patches of that original paint, peeking through the cracks of the newer layers. They are not dead ends in our story, but clues to a much older story that preceded it. They hint at population movements, cultural exchanges, and whole histories that left no written records and whose linguistic traces have otherwise vanished beyond the horizon of time depth. Recognizing this temporal barrier is both humbling and illuminating. It means we may never linguistically prove a genealogical link for these languages, because that proof evaporated millennia ago. But it also frees us to ask bigger questions, to look for answers in different kinds of evidence. If the words themselves cannot tell us the full story, where else can we turn to understand the people who spoke them? This realization prepares us to step outside the realm of pure linguistics and into the collaborative world of archaeology and genetics, where silent bones and ancient DNA might yet whisper the names of those lost language families. A silent pot, a carved symbol, a city's foundations, these are the tangible echoes of people who lived, worked, and dreamed, but they tell us nothing of the music of their speech. This is the great, frustrating divide between archaeology and linguistics. An archaeologist can hold a piece of Jarman pottery from ancient Japan, tracing its intricate chord-marked patterns, understanding the technology that made it, even inferring the social rituals it served. Yet that pot cannot utter a single word of the language its maker spoke, a language that may well have been the ancient ancestor of the Ainu isolate. Similarly, the mysterious Vinca symbols, etched onto artifacts across prehistoric southeastern Europe over 7,000 years ago, tantalize us with their repetitive patterns. Are they proto-writing, ritual marks, or property symbols? Without a clear link to a known language, they are a locked door, and the key, the spoken tongue of the Vinca culture, is lost. This is the silent dialogue, the attempt to have two fields of study converse across a chasm of millennia. They can point at the same place and time, but one speaks of objects and the other of words, and the translation between them is often impossible. Nowhere is this tension more profound or more agonizing for scholars than in the case of the Indus Valley civilization, flourishing over 4,000 years ago along the rivers of modern Pakistan and northwest India. It was a marvel of the ancient world. Its cities, like Mohenjo-Daro and Harappa, boasted sophisticated urban planning, standardized weights, advanced drainage, and a vibrant artistic tradition. And they left behind a script found on thousands of small seals, tablets, and pottery fragments. The Indus script is a beautiful, concise system of symbols. But it remains undeciphered, one of the world's great epigraphic puzzles. The reason for this enduring mystery ties directly to our theme of isolation. If the language behind the Indus script was an isolate, a unique tongue with no known relatives, spoken by the civilization's founders, and then lost when the civilization declined, then decipherment becomes a task of almost unimaginable difficulty. Normally, decipherers use a Rosetta Stone approach, finding a known language to bridge the gap. But if the Indus language was a true isolate, with no descendant tongues to provide clues, the script becomes a code with no cipher. The magnificent archaeological record shows us what the Harappans built and how they lived, but their seals, for all their eloquence in imagery, are utterly mute on the question of what they said. Their grandeur is forever separated from their spoken word, a ghostly presence felt but never heard. This interdisciplinary gap is a powerful reminder of the fragility of historical memory. Material culture is durable, but language is evanescent. A city can fall to ruins and be excavated, but a language, when its last speaker is gone, can vanish without a physical trace. The tension between the silent, solid evidence of archaeology and the ghostly, intangible evidence of linguistics forces a kind of intellectual humility. It shows us that our picture of the past is assembled from fragments, and some fragments, the most human ones, the stories, the jokes, the lullabies, are the most fragile of all. It fuels endless, fascinating speculation. Were the creators of the unique German pots the linguistic ancestors of the Ainu? Did the people who used the Vinci symbols speak a tongue related to a lost European isolate? We may never know for certain. This very uncertainty, however, points the way forward. It suggests that if we want to chase these ghostly languages beyond the horizon of time depth, we must look for a different kind of evidence, one written not in clay or stone, but in the most intimate archive of all, the human body itself. The human body itself holds a different kind of ancient text, written in the language of deoxyribonucleic acid. This is the frontier of archaeogenetics, a field that reads the genetic markers passed down through thousands of generations to reconstruct human migrations. It offers a tantalizing new tool for our quest, but it also introduces a profound and cautionary twist. The central premise is powerful yet simple. While a community can adopt a new language through trade, conquest, or cultural influence, their genetic ancestry, the biological legacy carried in their cells, remains a more stable record of their deep past. So, if we find a population speaking a unique, isolated language, do their genes also tell a story of long-term separation? The answer, in some striking cases, is yes. Take the Basque people. Genetic studies have consistently shown that Basques carry distinct markers that set them apart from their Spanish and French neighbors. Their genetic profile suggests a remarkable degree of continuity with some of the earliest populations to settle in Western Europe after the last ice age. This is a powerful correlation. The linguistic isolation of Euskara is mirrored by a genetic distinctiveness, painting a coherent picture of a people who have maintained both their biological and cultural heritage in their mountain refuge for millennia. It suggests that, for the Basques, language and genes have traveled together on the same historical journey, a rare and precious alignment of evidence. But this alignment is the exception, not the rule. The relationship between our words and our ancestry is far more complex and often deliberately untangled. Consider the nation of Hungary, situated in the heart of Europe. The Hungarian language is part of the Uralic family, related distantly to Finnish and Estonian, with its origins far to the east on the steppes of Eurasia. Yet, genetically, modern Hungarians are largely indistinguishable from their Central European neighbors. The explanation is a classic historical process. Over 1,000 years ago, a confederation of nomadic tribes, the Magyars, swept into the Carpathian Basin. They brought their Uralic language with them, which took root and endured. However, the relatively small Magyar population intermixed with the much larger local Slavic and other European communities already living there. Over centuries, the genes blended, but the language prevailed. Here, language and genetics tell two completely different stories, one of a dramatic migration from the east, preserved in speech, and another of biological integration with the local landscape. This decoupling is a critical warning for anyone seeking easy answers about language isolates. Finding a unique genetic signature in a population, like with the Basques, can be a compelling clue. But not finding one does not disprove the ancient nature of their language. A community could have preserved its unique tongue for generations while biologically blending with newcomers, or conversely, a group could have adopted a new language while retaining their genetic distinctiveness. This complex interplay forces us to view each isolate not as a single puzzle, but as a multidimensional one, The story of a language is a tapestry woven from three distinct and often independent threads. The first thread is linguistic, the structure and sound of the words themselves. The second is genetic, the biological lineage of the people who speak it. And the third is archaeological, the material culture they left behind. For a truly complete picture, these threads need to align, but history is rarely so neat. A population's biological history and their linguistic history can be separate narratives, one of deep ancestry and another of cultural choice or necessity. This realization makes the mystery of isolates even deeper and more fascinating. It warns us against simplistic conclusions. We cannot assume that because a language is unique, its speakers must be genetically unique or vice versa. The true story is found in the tension between these lines of evidence. As archaeogenetics continues to advance, sequencing ancient DNA from millennia-old remains, it offers the chance to peer directly into the past of these populations. We may one day find that the ancient farmers of the Indus Valley or the prehistoric inhabitants of the Japanese archipelago carried genetic signatures that point toward the homelands of our linguistic ghosts. But we must always remember that genes map the movement of people, while words map the movement of ideas, and those two journeys, though often intertwined, can follow astonishingly different paths. Geography is the silent architect of linguistic history, shaping not just where people live but how they speak. To understand why a language like Basque could survive for millennia, we must look at the land itself. Mountain ranges, dense rainforests, and remote islands function as natural laboratories for linguistic isolation. They create refuges, places where the powerful currents of migration, conquest, and cultural exchange are slowed to a trickle. High valleys become sealed chambers where a unique way of speaking can echo undisturbed for ages. This is not an accident, it is a direct consequence of terrain. The Pyrenees, where Basque thrives, are a perfect example. These rugged mountains presented a formidable barrier to the Roman legions, to later medieval kingdoms, and to the homogenizing spread of languages like Latin and its descendants. The communities nestled on those slopes were hard to reach, hard to conquer, and therefore hard to assimilate. Their language became part of the landscape, as enduring as the rock beneath them. Contrast this with the fate of languages on open plains or along great river valleys. The steppes of Eurasia and the fertile floodplains of the Indus or the Danube were not barriers, they were highways. They facilitated the rapid movement of people, armies, and trade goods, and with those movements came languages, spreading over vast distances, mixing, and often overwhelming the local tongues. A language on a plain is exposed, vulnerable to every new wind that blows across it. A language in a high mountain valley is sheltered, protected by the very walls that define its world. This geographical lens gives us a powerful predictive tool. If we want to hunt for other potential language isolates, we should look to the world's most imposing and fragmented landscapes. Perhaps no place on Earth demonstrates this principle more vividly than the Caucasus Mountains, a colossal knot of rock straddling the border between Europe and Asia. This region is often called a mountain of tongues, and for good reason. In an area not much larger than the state of Georgia, linguists have identified dozens of languages from several distinct families, alongside a handful that defy classification and may be isolates in their own right. Languages like Georgian, with its own ancient script, exist alongside smaller, enigmatic tongues spoken in a single valley or by a handful of villages. The geography here is one of extreme verticality, with deep gorges and towering peaks creating thousands of natural compartments. Each valley could, over centuries, nurture its own linguistic tradition, with limited contact even with the community in the next valley over. The Caucasus is a living museum of linguistic diversity precisely because its terrain made large-scale political unification, and linguistic standardization almost impossible until very recently. It is a testament to how mountains don't just divide countries, they create worlds. Dense, impenetrable rainforests serve a similar isolating function. The Amazon basin, with its vast river networks and thick canopy, is another potential refuge for linguistic uniqueness. While many Amazonian languages are classified into families like Tupian or Caribbean, the sheer scale and difficulty of the environment mean that numerous languages remain poorly documented. Some, spoken by small, uncontacted or recently contacted groups, could very well be isolated last remnants of peoples who retreated into the forest's heart to escape encroachment, their languages evolving in profound solitude. Islands, too, are classic natural laboratories. While Sardinia's language is a Romance dialect and not an isolate, its history is instructive. Sardinian preserves archaic Latin features long lost on the mainland, precisely because the island's isolation allowed it to develop on its own unique path, buffered from the linguistic innovations sweeping through Italy. This preservation power hints at how a true isolate could survive on an island for thousands of years, its origins lost to the sea that surrounds it. By understanding this role of geography, we stop seeing these languages as random anomalies. Their survival is a direct map of the Earth's most rugged, inaccessible places. They persist in the cracks of the world, in the places empires could not easily reach, and where the tide of global languages has not yet swept through. This realization turns our gaze toward the planet's remaining remote frontiers, asking what other singular voices might still be speaking from the deep valleys, the trackless forests, and the distant shores, telling stories in a tongue that has never been translated. If geography is the silent architect, then the Caucasus Mountains are its masterpiece. This colossal, crumpled barrier between the Black Sea and the Caspian is not merely a border between continents. It is a fortress of human sound, a place where time itself seems to have splintered into 1,000 echoes. Here, in a space smaller than many American states, you can walk from one valley to the next and step into a completely different linguistic universe. This is the region that truly earns the title, a mountain of tongues, and it holds some of the most stubborn puzzles in our story. The diversity is staggering. You have the Kartvelian family, a small but ancient group whose most famous member is Georgian, with its own beautiful, curling alphabet invented over 1,500 years ago. Georgian is not an isolate, but it is the heart of its own unique family, unrelated to the massive Indo-European or Turkic groups that surround the mountains. Then there are the languages of the Northeast Caucasian family, like Chechen and Avar. These are not just different languages, they feel like different ways of structuring reality. They are famous among linguists for sounds that seem almost impossible to the outsider, featuring consonant clusters that would tie most tongues in knots. Try to pronounce a word that begins with 3 or 4 consonants in a row, with no vowel to break them up. For speakers of these languages, this is everyday speech, a rolling, percussive rhythm born in the echoes of deep gorges. Their grammar is just as distinctive. Many use a system called ergativity, which fundamentally changes how a sentence describes action. In English, we say, "She sees the mountain," treating the subject, she, and the object, the mountain, differently. In an ergative language, the grammar might treat she in that sentence the same way it treats the mountain in a sentence like "the mountain stands." This isn't a minor detail, it represents a profoundly different cognitive approach to describing events and agency, a philosophical choice embedded in syntax. What makes the Caucasus so critical to our mystery is that it isn't home to just one isolate or one strange family. It is a crowded sanctuary where multiple ancient lineages, each potentially as old as Basque or Burushaski, have survived literally within shouting distance of one another. The towering peaks and isolated valleys acted as a perfect preservation chamber, A powerful empire could sweep across the plains, but subjugating every single fortified highland hamlet was a futile task. This meant that while languages on the open steppes were constantly blending and being replaced, here in the mountains they could hold their ground. The region became a living museum of linguistic deep history, a refutation of the idea that migration always leads to simple replacement. In the Caucasus, migration waves seem to have crashed against the mountains and flowed around them, leaving these ancient linguistic pockets intact. This dense coexistence challenges every neat narrative of Eurasian prehistory. It suggests that the past was not a series of clear, sweeping replacements, but a complex, enduring mosaic. The people of these mountains may have traded, intermarried, and fought with one another for millennia, yet they maintained their separate linguistic identities. Each valley held onto its own story, its own way of ordering the world through sound. So when we look at a language map of the Caucasus, we are not looking at a simple puzzle. We are looking at a palimpsest, a document written, erased, and rewritten over thousands of years, where the earliest layers of text are still startlingly visible. It proves that under the right geographical conditions, deep time doesn't just whisper, it can still speak in a chorus of vibrant, defiant, and utterly distinct voices. The written word itself begins with a mystery. In the fertile land between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, where humanity first built the ziggurats and sprawling cities of Mesopotamia, the oldest deciphered script reveals a language with no family. This is Sumerian, the tongue of ancient Uruk and spoken and written over 5,000 years ago. Its cuneiform symbols, pressed into clay with a reed stylus, recorded laws, epic poetry, temple inventories, and personal letters, giving us the very first direct window into a human mind. Yet, for all its profound historical presence, Sumerian stands utterly alone in the linguistic record. It shares no proven ancestral link with the Semitic languages of the Akkadians who later ruled the region, nor with any other known family from Europe or Asia. It is an isolate at the very dawn of recorded history. The structure of Sumerian is beautifully logical and distinct. Linguists call it agglutinative. This means that words are built like chains, where clear, individual pieces are linked together to modify meaning. Think of a core word, a root, and then adding specific prefixes or suffixes one after another, each one changing the sense in a predictable way. A single Sumerian verb could convey not just the action, but who was doing it, to whom, when, and how, all in one compact, modular unit. It was a language engineered for precision, perfectly suited for the administrative complexity of the world's first bureaucracies. Deciphering this lost language was a monumental intellectual feat. For centuries, the wedge-shaped cuneiform script was just enigmatic decoration on ruined palace walls. The breakthrough came from a monumental inscription high on a cliff face in Iran, at a place called Behistun. Carved by order of the Persian king Darius the Great, the same text was inscribed in 3 different cuneiform scripts: Old Persian, Elamite, and Babylonian Akkadian. Scholars used the known Old Persian as a key to slowly unlock the Babylonian, and through Babylonian, they finally began to hear the echoes of the even older Sumerian language that Babylonian scribes had studied and preserved. It was a linguistic excavation, digging down through layers of time, but the origin of the Sumerian people and their language remains one of archaeology's great unanswered questions. Did their language arrive with the Ubaid culture, the precursors to Mesopotamian civilization who first drained the marshes and began establishing temple-centered settlements? Or was Sumerian the ancient tongue of indigenous groups living in the region long before, a language that then became the vehicle for the revolutionary ideas of urbanization and writing? We simply do not know. What is clear is that by the time the Semitic-speaking Akkadians rose to power, Sumerian was already the venerable language of high culture, religion, and scholarship, much like Latin in medieval Europe. It was studied and preserved long after it ceased to be a day-to-day spoken language. This reality is deeply humbling. Sumerian forces us to confront a staggering idea. The very first civilization whose thoughts we can directly read, whose hymns we can hear, and whose accounting ledgers we can examine, communicates with us in a tongue of unknown origin. Its isolation is not a product of recent history, but a condition that reaches back to our collective beginnings. It tells us that before the great migrations that filled our history books, before the spread of the language families we can map, there were already pockets of unique human expression, speaking to us from the very first page of our written story, in a language we can translate but cannot genealogically place. The silence around its origins is as eloquent as the words on its clay tablets. East of the Mesopotamian floodplains, where the Zagros Mountains rise from the Iranian plateau, another script carved its story into the walls of history. The Elamite language was the voice of a formidable and often overlooked civilization, a kingdom that rivaled Sumer and later stood beside Persia. For over 2,000 years, from the dusty foundations of the city of Susa to the grand inscriptions of the Achaemenid emperors, Elamite served as a language of court, administration, and culture. Its cuneiform script, adapted from Mesopotamia but distinct in its own right, recorded treaties, royal decrees, and religious texts. Yet, for all its historical prominence and centuries of interaction with its famous neighbors, the language itself remains a profound enigma. Despite being surrounded by the Semitic languages of Mesopotamia and later the Indo-European tongues of the Persians and Medes, Elamite demonstrates no clear genealogical link to either of these vast families. It stands once again in stubborn isolation. Deciphering Elamite has been a slow and patient puzzle. The script itself, though based on the same wedge-shaped cumbiform system as Akkadian, uses many unique signs whose meanings and sounds had to be painstakingly reconstructed. The breakthrough, once more, came from that trilingual key at Behistun. The inclusion of an Elamite version of Darius the Great's proclamation provided the crucial parallel texts needed to crack its code. Through this, scholars could begin to hear the language, but understanding its origins was a different challenge entirely. The grammar and core vocabulary of Elamite resist easy classification. Some researchers, noting a handful of structural similarities, have ventured a highly speculative connection to the Dravidian language family, now primarily located far to the southeast in the Indian subcontinent. This theory, while fascinating, remains deeply controversial and unproven. It is a hypothesis that hangs by the thinnest of threads, highlighting just how desperate the search for relatives can become when faced with such a solitary tongue. The story of Elamite, however, offers a crucial lesson beyond its isolation. Its long history shows that political and cultural dominance does not automatically erase linguistic uniqueness. The Elamite kingdom was a major power, engaging in constant diplomacy, trade, and conflict with Sumerian city-states and later Babylonian empires. They were not a remote, hidden people. They were active participants in the ancient Near Eastern world. Yet, they maintained their own language for official use across millennia. Even after the Persian Achaemenid Empire absorbed Elam's territories, Elamite did not vanish immediately. It persisted for a time as an administrative language within the Persian bureaucracy, a testament to its deep-rooted institutional role. This longevity in the face of imperial forces challenges a simple narrative of conquest and linguistic replacement. It suggests that languages can hold on through sheer utility and cultural prestige, woven into the fabric of a state's identity. And yet, Elamite did ultimately fade into silence. Its disappearance adds a poignant final layer to the mystery. A language that had endured for more than 2,000 years, that had recorded the laws of kings and the dedications of temples, gradually ceased to be spoken. The process was likely slow, a result of shifting political centers, changing trade routes, and the rising, overwhelming influence of Persian and later Aramaic as lingua francas of empire. There was no single catastrophic event, but a slow erosion, a turning away from an ancient way of speaking toward new tools of communication and power. The last known Elamite inscriptions date from the time of Alexander the Great's conquests, and then the voice falls quiet. This kind of loss is not a dramatic extinction, but a slow sunset. It reminds us that languages can vanish not only when their speakers are displaced, but when the world around them changes so fundamentally that the old words no longer seem to fit the new reality. The silent clay tablets of Susa hold the grammar of a lost kingdom, a language that helped build an empire but could not, in the end, outlast the tides of time. The Mediterranean Sea was not a silent blue expanse in the Bronze Age, but a crowded, noisy highway of humanity. Long before the rise of Athens or Rome, this inland sea hummed with the sounds of oars, the barter of traders, and a dizzying chorus of languages, many of which have since fallen into a silence so complete we can barely hear their echoes. Along its shores, sophisticated cultures rose, traded ideas, and spoke in tongues that defy our modern maps. Take the Etruscans of central Italy, a people whose vibrant art and advanced engineering laid the very foundations for Roman civilization. Their language, preserved in thousands of inscriptions, is a riddle. While it uses an alphabet adapted from the Greeks, making it possible to read the letters, the meaning of the words remains largely elusive. After centuries of study, no one has convincingly linked Etruscan to the Indo-European family or any other known group. It stands as a probable isolate, the mysterious native voice of the Italian peninsula, eventually absorbed and silenced by the relentless spread of Latin. Then there is the island of Crete, home to the magnificent palace of Knossos and the brilliant Minoan civilization. Their administrative records were kept in a script we call Linear A. Unlike its later cousin, Linear B, which was deciphered and revealed an early form of Greek, Linear A remains stubbornly unreadable. The symbols are clear, but the language they encode is not. Most scholars believe it represents a Minoan language, one that is likely another isolate, unrelated to Greek or any other tongue of the region. It is the voice of a spectacular culture, captured in ink on clay, yet utterly mute to our understanding. Beyond these, there are ghostly whispers embedded in the languages we do know. The ancient Greeks themselves spoke of earlier inhabitants they called the Pelasgians. While this may have been a blanket term for various pre-Greek peoples, it points to a real linguistic substrate. Scholars find it in the strange, un-Greek sounds of many place names and in certain loanwords that have no Indo-European etymology. Mountains, rivers, and cities across Greece bear names that were already ancient when Homer composed his epics, linguistic fossils of the people who first named those landscapes. The story of these Mediterranean languages is one of layers, of a complex palimpsest that was written over. They did not vanish in a sudden catastrophe, but through the slow, powerful processes of cultural and political integration. As the classical civilizations, first the Greeks, then the Romans, expanded their influence, their languages became the tools of commerce, administration, and prestige. Local tongues, like Etruscan, retreated first from public life, then from the home, and finally from memory. Their disappearance reminds us that the ancient world was a far more linguistically diverse place than our history books often suggest. The familiar families like Indo-European represent the victors, the tongues that spread. But beneath them, like the foundations of a Roman road built over an Etruscan path, lie the buried stones of other ways of speaking, other ways of seeing the world, now known only through the faintest of impressions they left behind. But even when a language falls silent, its ghost may not be entirely gone. It can linger in the very structure of the tongue that replaced it, a subtle fingerprint left on the conqueror's speech. Linguists call this the substrate hypothesis, and it is one of the most powerful tools for hearing echoes from a lost world. Imagine a new language arriving in a region carried by migrants or conquerors. The local population eventually adopts this new way of speaking, but they learn it as a second language. In doing so, they often import the sounds, the rhythms, and even some of the words from their original, native tongue into their version of the new one. Over generations, as children learn this modified version, those imported features become permanent, woven into the fabric of what was once a foreign language. These are substrate influences, the ghosts in the linguistic machine. A clear example is the Celtic substrate in English. When the Germanic Angles and Saxons arrived in Britain, they encountered Celtic-speaking Britons. As those communities shifted to Old English, they left traces. Some linguists argue that the continuous verb form, like I am walking instead of I walk, so characteristic of English but unusual in other Germanic languages, might be a grammatical gift from the Celtic languages that were there first. It is as if the underlying Celtic way of thinking about action subtly reshaped how English expresses time. This phenomenon becomes even more tantalizing when we look for traces of languages that vanished long before written history. Take Greek. Classical Greek has a number of words with no clear Indo-European origin, words for things like the sea, certain plants, and place names ending in enthos or essos like Corinth and Knossos. These are thought to be linguistic fossils, borrowed from the pre-Greek languages spoken by the peoples who inhabited the Aegean world before the ancestors of the Greeks arrived. Those languages likely isolate themselves, left their mark on the vocabulary of one of history's most influential cultures. The British Isles offer another cryptic case. Beyond the known Celtic influence, some researchers speculate about a deeper, pre-Celtic substrate. The peculiar syntax and certain phonological patterns found in the Celtic languages of the region, and even in later English, might preserve the shadowy outline of the languages spoken by the mysterious builders of Stonehenge and other Neolithic monuments. These people left behind monumental stones but no written records of their speech. Yet, through the substrate, they might have left an imprint on how later inhabitants structured their sentences. This idea transforms how we listen to modern languages. They are not pure, linear descendants but palimpsests. The everyday speech of millions might contain, buried within its grammar and its most ancient place names, the last whispers of a people whose own voice was silenced millennia ago. For a researcher, it is detective work of the highest order, sifting through the familiar to find the alien, listening for the faint, rhythmic echo of a lost isolate within the modern chorus. It suggests that no language ever truly dies if it first leaves its signature on the successor. This search for lost connections can lead us down a very tempting but treacherous path. The human mind craves patterns, and when faced with profound mysteries like these isolated languages, the desire to find a grand, unifying answer becomes almost overwhelming. This is the territory of long-range comparison, where scholars and enthusiasts alike attempt to bridge linguistic chasms that span not centuries, but tens of thousands of years. Some of the most ambitious theories propose reconstructing proto-world, a single, original human language from which all others supposedly descended. Others, like the Nostratic hypothesis, seek to demonstrate a deep family relationship between several major language families, including Indo-European, Uralic, and Altaic, potentially encompassing some of our isolates. On the surface, the goal is noble, to find the ultimate roots of human speech. The problem lies in the methodology and the extreme depths of time involved. At such distances, the systematic, sound-by-sound correspondences required by the comparative method become impossible to verify. The evidence has simply faded beyond recovery. What often fills the void is a reliance on superficial similarities, a handful of words that sound vaguely alike across continents, or broad structural features that could easily arise independently. This approach is prone to what linguists call chance resemblances. Given enough languages and enough words, some will coincidentally sound similar, just as two people on opposite sides of the planet might share the same birthday. Without the rigorous framework of systematic change, these parallels are intriguing, but they are not proof of common ancestry. Mainstream linguistics views these grand theories with deep skepticism, not out of closed-mindedness, but out of scientific rigor. A hypothesis must be testable and falsifiable. If a theory can explain any possible data set by selectively choosing favorable examples and ignoring counter-evidence, it ceases to be science and enters the realm of pseudoscience. It becomes a narrative, not a discovery. This critical perspective is not meant to stifle curiosity, but to ground it. It reminds us that the true wonder of these isolated languages may not lie in forcing them into a single, grand family tree. Their value might be in their very stubborn refusal to connect. Each one forces us to acknowledge the vast, unknown expanses of human prehistory, the countless communities and cultures that flourished and faded without leaving a clear linguistic lineage. They are monuments to diversity, not uniformity. Appreciating this requires a disciplined kind of wonder, one that can sit comfortably with mystery, that values the solid, humble fact of a single unclassifiable language over the seductive but unprovable story of a universal mother tongue. This disciplined approach ultimately honors the uniqueness of each voice by not forcing it into a chorus it was never meant to join. The silence of a lost language is a quiet that can never be filled. For the guardians of these unique tongues, the greatest challenge is no longer decipherment, but preservation. Every time an elder who is the last fluent speaker of a language like Kusunda passes away, an entire library of human experience closes its doors forever. This reality has sparked a global movement, a race against time led by documentary linguists. These are not academics in distant libraries, but individuals who embed themselves within communities, sometimes for years, building trust and listening. Their tools are recorders and cameras, but their method is rooted in deep collaboration. They document not just vocabulary lists, but the living breath of the language, the oral histories, the ceremonial songs, the casual conversations around a fire, the specific words for local plants and weather patterns that encode generations of environmental wisdom. This work transcends data collection. It is an act of cultural solidarity, helping communities affirm that their way of speaking is a treasure worthy of a permanent record. This process is guided by crucial ethical considerations. The goal is not extraction but partnership. Linguists work with not just on behalf of community members, often training local people in documentation techniques themselves. The resulting archives, digital dictionaries, annotated recordings, transcribed stories belong to the community as much as to science. They become tools for cultural revitalization, a foundation upon which new speakers can build. We see this powerful shift from documentation to active revival in inspiring examples worldwide. In Japan, the Ainu language, once suppressed, is now taught in dedicated cultural centers and universities, with new children's books and music being created. In the Basque country, a comprehensive network of Ikastola schools has successfully educated a new generation of fluent Euskara speakers, integrating the language fully into modern life, from television to technology. Digital technology has become an unexpected ally in this ancient struggle. Smartphone apps offer vocabulary lessons, social media groups connect scattered speakers, and online repositories make archival materials accessible to anyone with an internet connection. These tools democratize language learning, allowing a young person in a city to reconnect with the ancestral tongue of their grandparents in a remote village. The objective of these efforts is profound. It is not about freezing a language in time as a museum exhibit, but about empowering it to live, change, and grow in the contemporary world. When a community reclaims its linguistic heritage, it reclaims a unique way of perceiving reality. Each isolate holds concepts, philosophical frameworks, and connections to the natural world that exist nowhere else. To lose that language is to lose a distinct color in the spectrum of human thought, a particular answer to the universal question of what it means to be human. The race to document and revitalize is therefore a race to preserve irreplaceable chapters of our collective story, ensuring that these solitary voices are not just recorded as echoes, but heard as living conversations for generations to come. The newest tools in this ancient detective story do not come from dusty archives, but from the hum of server farms. We are entering a frontier where artificial intelligence and computational linguistics are bringing a radical new scale to the search for lost connections. Imagine the task of comparing every sound, every grammatical rule, and every core word between two languages, a process that could take a human scholar a lifetime of meticulous work. Now imagine an algorithm that can perform this analysis across hundreds of languages simultaneously in a matter of hours. This is the power of machine learning applied to our deepest linguistic mysteries. These systems are trained on vast datasets of known languages, learning the complex, often hidden rules of how languages change and diverge over time. Once trained, they can be unleashed on the great unknowns like Basque or Burushaski, scanning their structures against every documented tongue on the planet, searching for statistical signals of a relationship that the human eye might never catch. Projects around the world are now using these techniques to suggest possible, incredibly distant links. An algorithm might parse the unique verb structures of a Caucasian language and find faint, algorithmic echoes in the syntax of a Siberian tongue, proposing a migratory pathway no historian had ever considered. Another might analyze the phonetic building blocks of Nihali, sifting through layers of loanwords to computationally isolate what might be its original, ancient core. This technological armory offers a genuine spark of hope, a way to peer just a little further beyond that horizon of time depth. Yet, for all its processing power, artificial intelligence in this field is a tool, not an oracle. It excels at finding patterns, but it cannot tell us what those patterns mean. A machine might flag a surprising correlation between the sound systems of two isolates, but it is the human linguist who must ask the critical questions. Is this correlation a sign of shared ancestry, or is it the result of universal tendencies in how human speech evolves? Could it be sheer coincidence, amplified by the algorithm's immense search capacity? The hypotheses generated by AI are starting points for deeper investigation, not final answers. They require the nuanced, culturally informed judgment of scholars who understand history, archaeology, and the messy, beautiful complexity of how people actually use language. This partnership between human and machine is forging a new kind of linguistics, one that acknowledges both the power of data and the irreplaceable value of interpretation. It also raises profound new questions about the nature of language itself. As we teach machines to recognize the deep grammar of human speech, we are forced to define what that grammar truly is, to quantify the ineffable. In seeking to solve our oldest puzzles, we are inevitably creating new ones, wondering not just where these lone languages came from, but what their enduring solitude can teach us about the very fabric of human communication. Far out in the Bay of Bengal, where the turquoise waters of the Indian Ocean meet emerald rainforests, lies one of the planet's most profound human time capsules. The Andaman Islands are a remote archipelago, a chain of isolated dots on the map, and they are home to communities whose story may stretch back to the very dawn of our species' journey across the globe. For linguists and geneticists alike, these islands are not just a geographical location. They are a portal, offering a glimpse into a world that existed tens of thousands of years before the pyramids were built or the first cities of Mesopotamia rose from the mud. The languages spoken here are not merely old, they are fragments of a prehistory so deep it defies our standard timelines. The indigenous peoples of the Andamans, such as the Great Andamanese groups, speak languages that form their own unique and isolated family. These tongues share no proven relationship with the major language families of mainland Asia, like Indo-European or Sino-Tibetan. They are a world apart, with complex grammatical structures and sounds that seem to echo the ancient environment itself. But the ultimate linguistic mystery here is one of complete silence from an island called North Sentinel. The Sentinelese people have maintained a steadfast isolation for thousands of years, actively rejecting contact with the outside world. Their language remains completely unknown, heard only in distant echoes across the water, a living speech from an unimaginably ancient past that we can observe but cannot decipher. This isolation is not an accident of history, but a deliberate and sustained choice protected by the formidable barrier of the sea and the community's own social boundaries. The significance of the Andamanese languages is magnified 1,000-fold by cutting-edge genetic research. Studies of the island's indigenous populations reveal a staggering fact. Their ancestry shows a direct lineage to some of the earliest waves of modern human migration out of Africa, dating back perhaps 50 or 60,000 years. This suggests their ancestors undertook a coastal journey along the rim of the Indian Ocean, eventually reaching and settling these isolated islands where they remained in profound seclusion. If their genetic story is one of the oldest chapters in human expansion, then their languages likely are too. The tongues of the Andamans may not be isolates in the sense of a single unique language, but as a family, they represent an entire isolated branch of human linguistic evolution. They are not a twig on the known language family tree. They are a separate tree entirely, one that sprouted from a seed planted in a different epoch of human history. This makes them perhaps the deepest possible linguistic time capsule in existence. They offer a potential window into how humans spoke after first spreading across the world, before the great language families we recognize today had even begun to form. Each word, each grammatical rule preserved in the great Andamanese languages, and each unseen structure in the Sentinelese tongue could hold clues about the cognitive and social world of our most ancient ancestors. Their speech is a direct connection to a time when humanity was a scattering of small, migratory communities, not nations or empires. The Andaman Islands stand as a powerful testament to how geography can preserve history. The surrounding ocean acted as a perfect moat, keeping the great cultural and linguistic currents of the mainland at bay for millennia. Here, a way of life and a way of speaking persisted in a bubble of deep time. This case challenges us to expand our definition of what an ancient language can be. It is not always a written script on a clay tablet. It can be the living, spoken words of a people whose journey began at the very origins of our global story. Their enduring voice, especially the guarded mystery of Sentinelese, reminds us that some chapters of the human narrative are written in a language we may never fully learn to read, but whose mere existence quietly reshapes our understanding of everything that came after. The story of our deepest past is not confined to islands or mountains. It is also written in the sounds of the human voice, in the sharp, percussive clicks that punctuate the air of East Africa. In northern Tanzania, near the shimmering expanse of Lake Eyasi, two languages speak to us from a time before farming, before empires, in a vocabulary that includes some of the oldest sounds in human speech. These are the Hadza and Sandor languages, and they are both profound isolates in a continent known for its immense linguistic diversity. What makes them extraordinary beyond their solitary status is their use of click consonants, those distinctive sounds many associate with the Khoisan languages far to the south. Yet, despite sharing this remarkable phonetic feature, linguistic analysis shows Hadza and Sandor are not related to each other, and they are not part of the Khoisan family. They are independent inventions, or perhaps independent survivals, of a way of speaking that once may have been far more widespread. The Hadza people, numbering around 1,000, are among the last communities on Earth to live primarily as hunter-gatherers, with a lifestyle that offers a direct window into humanity's ancestral past. Their language is perfectly adapted to this life, rich with vocabulary for tracking, for identifying plants with medicinal properties, and for understanding the subtle behaviors of animals. It is a language of immediate, precise observation. The Sandor, a larger community practicing a mix of farming, foraging, and herding, have a language equally unique with its own intricate stories and songs. The existence of these two click-using isolates, sitting side by side in one region of Africa, shatters any simple story. It suggests that the map of ancient African languages was not a simple patchwork of a few large families. Instead, it was likely a kaleidoscope of many distinct, unrelated tongues, a vibrant linguistic ecosystem that thrived for tens of thousands of years. The Great Bantu Expansion, which began around 3,000 years ago and spread agriculture and new languages across much of sub-Saharan Africa, was a transformative wave. But it did not wash over a blank slate. It moved across a landscape already filled with voices, like the ancestors of the Hadza and Sandor. These communities were not displaced, they persisted, holding onto their unique ways of speaking in the face of a changing world. Their survival forces a radical rethinking of African prehistory. The clicks in their languages are not a sign of a single, ancient click-speaking family that fractured. They are more like independent discoveries, or perhaps distant echoes of a time when such sounds were more common among the diverse foraging communities of early humanity. Each language in its isolation represents a separate, enduring thread of human culture, a different answer to the question of how to live and speak on this continent. Their continued presence is a quiet testament to resilience, and a powerful reminder that the deepest roots of human diversity are often found not in the stories of great migrations, but in the steadfast continuity of a people who simply stayed, generation after generation, speaking the world into being with sounds that have endured since the very dawn of language itself. These solitary voices scattered across mountains and forests are not random errors in our historical map. When we listen to them together, a much larger, more startling picture begins to emerge. The sheer persistence of these unclassifiable tongues suggests a radical possibility. What if our current world of large, dominant language families is the exception, not the rule, in the long story of humanity? For most of human history, the planet may have sounded profoundly different. Before the rise of agriculture, before empires consolidated power and spread their speech across continents, the Earth was likely a mosaic of incredible linguistic diversity. Think of it not as a few great forests, but as a global archipelago of tiny, unique linguistic islands. Each valley, each river basin, each coastal enclave could have nurtured its own distinct way of speaking, evolving in relative isolation for thousands of years. In this model, Basque is not a bizarre survivor in Europe. It is a direct descendant of one of those countless original islands, a fragment of the linguistic landscape that existed before the Indo-European tide swept across the continent. Burushaski is not an anomaly in the Himalayas. It is a remnant of the diverse tongues that once echoed through all the high valleys. Kusunda, Nihali, the languages of the Andamans, each one is a last flickering light from a sky that was once filled with stars. This perspective fundamentally changes how we interpret human prehistory. The grand narratives we construct often focus on the spread of the winners, the languages carried by farmers, herders, and conquering armies. But the isolates force us to consider the other side of that story, the rich, complex tapestry of peoples who were already there. The spread of a major language family does not necessarily mean the complete replacement of a population. Often, it means the overlay of a new prestige language, while the old tongues retreated, persisted in pockets, or faded away over generations. Our surviving isolates are the most tenacious of those old tongues, the ones that refuse to fade completely. They are not puzzles to be solved and filed away. They are precious remnants, each one a unique data point from a lost world. They force a humbling reevaluation of models that rely solely on clear, sweeping migrations. Human history in deep time appears less like a series of neat replacements and more like a constant, messy process of interaction, where languages blend, shift, and sometimes, through sheer resilience or geographic luck, hold a solitary line for millennia. This realization asks us to listen to the silence between the known families and to understand that within that silence, an entire chorus of human expression once lived, spoke, and shaped the world. A language does more than label the world, it can quietly teach us how to see it. This idea, often called the Sapir-Whorf hypothesis, suggests that the structure of our speech might gently shape the contours of our thought. For the speakers of a truly isolated language, this relationship can be profoundly intimate, offering a window into a cultural universe built on different foundations. Take the intricate kinship terms found in the Ainu language. Where English might use a single word like aunt, Ainu employs a rich vocabulary that specifies whether the aunt is from the mother's side or the father's side, and often her relative age. This isn't just a list of titles, it's a grammatical map of social relationships, emphasizing the importance of lineage, clan, and precise social roles within the community. The language itself reinforces a specific way of understanding family and one's place within it. Similarly, consider how a language might organize space. Some Amazonian languages spoken by communities deeply connected to the rainforest do not use relative terms like left and right. Instead, they rely on absolute cardinal directions or geographic features of the riverine landscape. A speaker might say, "The cup is north of the bowl," or "move it toward the river." This requires a constant, innate awareness of one's orientation in the world, a cognitive skill honed by the language from childhood. It reflects a worldview where human activity is inseparably anchored to the vast, living geography around it. These grammatical choices are not about one perspective being more advanced or primitive than another. They are about different solutions to the universal human task of making sense of existence. An isolate, having developed in profound solitude, often presents these solutions in their most distinctive form. The unique verb structures of Basque or the complex gender system of Burushaski are not random quirks. They are the crystallized logic of generations, a collective philosophy encoded in syntax. When we lose such a language, we aren't just losing a set of words for things. We are losing a complete and self-contained system for interpreting reality. We lose specific metaphors, untranslatable jokes, and concepts for emotions or natural phenomena that have no direct equivalent anywhere else. It is the silencing of a particular voice in the human conversation, one that asked unique questions about time, responsibility, nature, and connection. This potential loss gives profound urgency to the work of preservation. Documenting an isolate is not merely an act of linguistic archaeology, it is an act of intellectual preservation. Each one is a library holding answers to questions we have not yet thought to ask, offering a reminder that the human mind is capable of far more diverse and beautiful patterns of thought than any single culture could ever contain. While the Mediterranean was filled with many voices, one stands out for its profound influence and enduring silence. The Etruscans were not a minor footnote, they were the cultural engine of pre-Roman Italy. Their cities, built on fortified hilltops, were marvels of engineering with advanced drainage and vibrant frescoes depicting lively banquets and athletic games. They taught the Romans the fundamentals of urban planning, of temple architecture, and even the ominous practice of reading omens in the flight of birds. Yet, the language of this foundational people remains a locked door, even though we hold the key to its alphabet. The Etruscan script is adapted from the Greek alphabet, which means we can sound out the words. We can read the inscriptions on their elaborate sarcophagi, their boundary stones, and their votive offerings to the gods, but understanding the meaning behind those familiar letters is a different challenge entirely. The language itself defies connection. It is clearly not an Indo-European language, unlike the Latin of the Romans or the Oscan of their other neighbors. Its grammar, its core vocabulary, its very soul is different, placing it firmly in the category of an isolate. This creates a fascinating paradox. Here is a civilization that is archaeologically rich and textually present, with over 10,000 inscriptions known to scholars. We have religious rituals, funeral epitaphs, and even a few longer texts on linen. And yet, without any known linguistic relatives to provide context, much of it remains stubbornly opaque. We can decipher names, numbers, and formulaic phrases about gifts to the gods, but the deeper narratives, the poetry, the laws, the daily thoughts of the people are lost in translation. This isolation has fueled a debate as old as history itself. The Greek historian Herodotus claimed the Etruscans originated in Lydia, in ancient Anatolia, fleeing a great famine to settle in Italy. This would suggest their language arrived from across the sea, a traveler without surviving kin. Other ancient writers argued for an autochthonous origin, that they were the native people of the land, developing in place over millennia. Modern archaeology cannot definitively settle this. The material culture shows clear influences from the East, but also deep, continuous development in Italy. The Etruscan case teaches a humbling lesson about the limits of evidence. A language can be well attested, written in a script we can read, and spoken by a people we know shaped history, and still guard its ultimate secrets because its family tree was felled completely. Every translated Etruscan word feels like a victory, but it also highlights the vast conversations we are still not privy to, the jokes, the laments, and the wisdom of the people who essentially taught Rome how to be a civilization before their own voice was absorbed and faded into the Italian soil. The Amazon rainforest breathes with a soundscape older than history, a living library of languages still being catalogued. This vast, green continent within a continent is not just an ecological treasure, it is one of the last great frontiers for linguistic discovery on Earth. Here, the humid air carries the echoes of dozens of distinct language families, some containing only a single member, standing alone in the verdant expanse like ancient, solitary trees. Languages such as Tukuna, spoken by tens of thousands along the river, or Trumai, used by a much smaller community, are often classified as isolates or remain stubbornly unclassified. They are linguistic worlds unto themselves, their grammars and vocabularies shaped by millennia of intimate dialogue with one of the planet's most complex ecosystems. Each holds words for medicinal plants, river currents, and animal behaviors that encode a library of knowledge we are only beginning to glimpse. Documenting these voices is a task of heroic difficulty, a testament to the dedication of field linguists. The challenges are immense, a blend of logistical ordeal and profound cultural sensitivity. Reaching remote communities can involve weeks of travel by boat and foot through trackless forest. Researchers must build trust slowly, often living within a community for years to understand not just the language, but the cultural context that gives it meaning. They work to record not only word lists, but the stories, songs, and daily conversations that are the lifeblood of the tongue. This work is a delicate partnership centered on the community's own goals for preserving its heritage. Yet this vital research is a race against a different, relentless clock. Across the Amazon basin, languages are shifting at an accelerating pace. The pressures are multifaceted: the encroachment of roads and settlements, the economic pull of national languages like Portuguese or Spanish, the influence of media, and the profound social changes that come with connection to a globalized world. For younger generations, the ancestral tongue can seem less relevant to the future they envision, leading to a quiet, generational break in the chain of oral transmission. This Amazonian context delivers a crucial, sobering insight. Linguistic isolation is not merely an artifact of the Old World, a curious relic of ancient Europe or Asia. It is a living, breathing, and vanishing reality across the globe. The rainforest has served as a refuge, preserving pockets of unique human expression, just as it has preserved species found nowhere else. But now, many of these linguistic puzzles, these entire ways of seeing the world, risk being lost before they are ever fully documented. Each one that fades represents more than a set of words. It is the disappearance of a unique philosophical system, a specific relationship with the natural world, and an irreplaceable chapter in the story of human adaptability. The work in the Amazon underscores a universal truth. Our planet's greatest repository of human cognitive diversity is also among its most vulnerable. The rustling leaves seem to speak in 1,000 tongues, but we must listen quickly before the whispers are drowned out by the uniform sounds of a homogenizing world. The debate over linguistic isolation finds one of its most heated arenas not in a remote valley, but in the heart of modern East Asia. Korean and Japanese are spoken by hundreds of millions, yet their origins remain shrouded in a fog of scholarly disagreement and national pride. At first glance, their grammatical structures feel strikingly similar. Both languages rely heavily on particles, small markers attached to words that indicate their role in a sentence, whether subject, object, or location. They both place the verb firmly at the end of a clause, creating a sentence architecture that builds suspense toward the final action. For centuries, these parallels have tempted linguists to propose a family relationship, often lumping them into a broad and controversial Altaic hypothesis alongside Turkish and Mongolian. But the comparative method, that rigorous tool of linguistic genealogy, has failed to deliver the necessary proof. The core vocabularies of Korean and Japanese do not show the systematic, sound-by-sound correspondences that would confirm they sprang from a single ancestral tongue. The similarities in grammar, many experts now argue, could be the result of profound and ancient contact, of languages influencing each other's structure over millennia without actually being relatives. This leaves each language in a fascinating, ambiguous space. Korean, with no clear genealogical link to Chinese, Japanese, or any Altaic language, stands as a strong candidate for a true isolate, a solitary linguistic universe. Japanese, however, is not alone. It is part of a small, close-knit family that includes the Ryukyuan languages of Okinawa. This makes Japanese not an isolate, but the most prominent member of its own tiny family, the Japonic family. This distinction is crucial. It shows that isolation is a spectrum. A language can be relatively isolated, with only one or two very close siblings, while still being disconnected from the vast, sprawling families that dominate continents. The controversy surrounding their classification is not purely academic. Language origins are deeply intertwined with questions of national identity and historical narrative. In regions with complex pasts, claiming an ancient, independent linguistic lineage can carry powerful cultural and political weight. Proposals of kinship can be seen as attempts to define historical spheres of influence, while assertions of isolation can be framed as declarations of unique cultural destiny. This reminds us that the science of language does not exist in a sterile vacuum. It is conducted by people within societies and is sometimes pulled into the tides of human sentiment. The unresolved mystery of Korean and Japanese, therefore, serves as a masterclass in intellectual humility. It shows that even with languages of global significance, backed by immense scholarly attention, the deep past can guard its secrets fiercely. Their story warns us against the desire for neat, satisfying answers, and instead invites us to appreciate the complexity itself, the possibility that some of humanity's most prominent voices emerged from origins we may never fully trace, speaking in patterns that connect through history in ways we can sense but cannot definitively prove. The resilience of these ancient tongues, forged in isolation, met its most formidable challenge not in another ice age, but in the arrival of ships and maps. For centuries, the deep valleys and remote islands that sheltered languages like Kusunda or the Andamanese families acted as perfect fortresses. Their solitude was their strength, allowing unique ways of speaking to evolve in a protected bubble of time. But that same isolation, which had been a shield, could become a profound vulnerability when confronted with a new kind of force, one that was systematic, ideological, and global in its reach. The era of colonialism did not merely introduce new neighbors, it imposed new worlds, colonial administrations seeking control and cultural assimilation, frequently enacted policies that explicitly targeted indigenous languages. Schools were established where children were forbidden to speak their mother tongue, often facing harsh consequences for doing so. The message was clear and deliberate: to participate in the modern world, to access education or opportunity, one had to abandon the old ways, starting with the very words one used to think and dream. This was not the older, slower process of language shift through trade or intermarriage, where elements might blend over generations. This was an active suppression, a conscious effort to sever a people from the deepest roots of their identity. The goal was to replace, not to interact, for an isolate, a language with no linguistic relatives to bolster it. This pressure could be catastrophic. With no larger family of speakers across a region, no written literature to serve as a standard, and its community physically disrupted or displaced, the language had few resources to draw upon. Its entire universe of meaning was held in the minds of a group that was being told forcefully that their universe was invalid. The loss in such circumstances is not a natural fading, it is an enforced silence. This historical pressure transformed dramatically with the dawn of the digital age, but its direction remained the same. Globalization, with its interconnected media and economies, operates on a different scale but with a similar homogenizing effect. Today, the pressure is less often a punitive law and more often a dazzling screen. A child in a village where a unique isolate is spoken now has a window to a world where entertainment, news, and social connection flow almost exclusively in a handful of dominant languages like English, Spanish, or Mandarin. Economic aspiration is tied to these global tongues, promising mobility and access. The choice for a young person becomes pragmatic, though no less painful for their elders. Why invest years mastering the complex grammar of an ancestral language spoken by a few hundred people, when fluency in a global language opens a portal to everything from university scholarships to international career paths? This is not malicious policy, but it is an immensely powerful current, and it flows directly into the homes and pockets of the last speakers. The isolated language, once protected by mountains, is now surrounded by an ocean of digital content in other tongues. Its stories compete with global blockbusters, its songs with international streaming playlists. The quiet, intimate space where it thrived is flooded with 1,000 other voices. Contrast this with the older, pre-colonial processes of language change. When the Romans expanded their empire, Latin spread across Europe. This was a powerful force of assimilation, certainly. But it was also a slow, centuries-long process of interaction. Local languages influenced the Latin that arrived, giving rise to the distinct Romance languages we know today. Vulgar Latin absorbed words, sounds, and concepts from Celtic, from Basque, from Germanic tongues. The result was not a pure replacement, but a messy, creative synthesis. Similarly, when the Magyar people brought their Uralic language to Hungary, they eventually blended with the local population, creating a new cultural and genetic mix, but the language itself took root and evolved in that new soil. These were transformations often born of conquest, but they involved a degree of mutual, if unequal, exchange over long periods. The pressure on an isolate today is of a different magnitude and speed. It is a sudden, overwhelming confrontation with a monolithic external culture that offers little space for synthesis. There is no time for the isolate to loan words or slowly shift its grammar, because the very social structures that transmit the language family, community, daily ritual are dismantled or devalued almost overnight. Understanding this history is not about assigning blame, but about diagnosing a crisis. The endangered state of so many language isolates today is not an inevitable, natural sunset. It is the direct result of specific historical forces, first of colonial eradication and now of globalized cultural and economic convergence. Their isolation, which once guaranteed their survival, now defines their fragility. A language with millions of speakers can lose half its population and still endure. A language isolate with 1,000 speakers loses a single generation of children, and its flame flickers dangerously close to extinction. This perspective reframes the entire endeavor of documentation and revitalization. It is not merely an academic pursuit to catalog curiosities. It is an act of historical reparation and cultural justice, an attempt to heal a rupture that was deliberately or systematically created. When a linguist works with a community to record the last fluent elder of an isolate, they are not just capturing sounds, they are bearing witness to a silence that was imposed and helping to ensure that this particular voice, against all the odds of history, gets to choose its own ending. The story of these languages, therefore, becomes a mirror for a larger question about our world. Will we allow the powerful currents of history to wash away every unique eddy and pool of human expression? Or can we find ways to value and sustain the distinct melodies that still rise, however faintly, from the deepest wells of our shared past? This very idea of a language emerging from deliberate design leads us to a fascinating crossroads. Could a mysterious language isolate actually be a constructed tongue? A ritual code invented long ago that somehow became a living, natural language. For the major cases we have explored, this is almost certainly not the answer. The sheer complexity, depth, and organic evolution evident in Basque or Burushaski could not be fabricated. They are the work of countless generations of unconscious refinement. Yet, the question itself is valuable because it forces us to examine the very boundaries of what makes a language real, and to appreciate the profound difference between something that is made and something that simply grows. To understand this distinction, look at the world of true constructed languages, or conlangs. These are languages built with intention, often with a philosophical or artistic goal in mind. Esperanto, created in the late 19th century by L. Zamenhof, was designed as a tool for international peace and understanding. Its vocabulary is drawn from European languages, and its grammar is beautifully regular and logical, free of the irregularities that accumulate in natural tongues over centuries. It was a conscious engineering project. Similarly, the Klingon language, developed by linguist Mark Okrand for a television and film franchise, was crafted to sound alien, with a deliberately non-human grammar and phonology. These languages have known birth certificates, their creators, and their original blueprints are matters of public record. They are brilliant intellectual achievements, but they are artifacts born from a single mind or a specific cultural moment. Now contrast that with a natural isolate. It has no known creator, no founding document, no moment of invention. Its irregularities are not flaws, but the fingerprints of deep time, the accumulated scars and beauties of adaptation. Its vocabulary is not borrowed from a committee of existing languages for ease of learning. It is a unique lexicon forged in the fires of a specific place and way of life. Where Esperanto was built for universal communication, a natural isolate evolved for the opposite reason, to perfectly serve the intimate, particular world of its speakers. This is the core of the mystery. A natural isolate is not a puzzle someone left for us to solve. It is the living record of a community's unbroken journey, a journey so long that its starting point has vanished from memory. The comparison ultimately reinforces the staggering, organic antiquity of the isolates. They were not invented, they emerged. They are not puzzles to be reverse engineered, but ecosystems of meaning that developed in profound solitude. This realization deepens our respect for them. They are not intellectual curiosities, but the oldest, most resilient forms of natural cultural growth, standing as silent, monumental proof of human communities whose roots reach into a soil we can no longer see. The swirling lines on the ancient clay tablet seem to dance, a graceful, cryptic script from a world of palaces and sea kings. This is Linear A, and it is perhaps the most elegant locked door in all of archaeology. Found on the island of Crete and across the Aegean, these beautiful symbols were the administrative hand of the magnificent Minoan civilization, Europe's first advanced society. Their frescoes show athletes leaping over bulls, their palaces were sprawling complexes with sophisticated plumbing, and their influence stretched across the Mediterranean. Yet for all this cultural brilliance, their own words remain a perfect mystery. The script itself is not entirely unfamiliar. Centuries later, the Mycenaean Greeks who came to dominate the region adapted it into a related system called Linear B. That script was famously deciphered in the 1950s, revealing an early form of Greek used for palace inventories and records, but Linear A is different. The same signs used to write a different language yield no such meaning. The mathematical notations for numbers and measures are clear, but the words they quantify are silent. This leads linguists to a compelling conclusion. The language encoded in Linear is almost certainly an isolate, a pre-Greek tongue spoken by the indigenous Minoan people. It would be a voice from a stratum of Mediterranean history that predates the arrival of the Hellenic world, a unique linguistic branch that grew and flourished on that island and then was cut down, leaving only these inscribed fragments behind. Deciphering it without a bilingual text, a Rosetta Stone that pairs it with a known language, is a task of monumental difficulty. It is like having a safe full of treasures but no combination, only the faintest echoes of the lock's mechanism. Scholars can analyze the patterns, the frequency of signs, the structure of the inscriptions, and they can make educated guesses. But without that crucial key, the voice inside remains muffled. The tantalizing possibility, however, is what makes this case so captivating. Solving Linear A would not merely add another language to a catalogue, it would throw open a window into the mind of the Minoans themselves. We could move beyond interpreting their art and architecture from the outside and finally hear them speak from within. We might learn the true names of their deities beyond the later Greek labels like Zeus or Poseidon. We could read their laws, their poetry, their personal letters, understanding how they conceived of trade, of power, of the sea that surrounded them. It would give voice to the creators of the labyrinth myth, to the first Europeans who built a complex, centralized state. This script is more than a writing system. It is the sealed lips of an entire civilization. Each undeciphered tablet is a sentence from a lost epic we cannot yet read, a direct line to a people whose cultural echoes shaped later Greek legend, but whose own story is told in symbols we can see but cannot understand. It stands as the ultimate reminder that some of history's most sophisticated chapters are written in a language we have not yet learned to hear. A story can be a vessel for memory long after the original event has faded. Within the myths and oral histories carried by communities speaking isolated languages, we find a different kind of evidence, one written not in grammar but in narrative. These are not literal history books, but they are cultural archives preserving the echoes of ancient journeys, environmental shifts, and foundational beliefs in the form of epic poems, folk tales, and ceremonial chants. When the linguistic structure offers no genealogical clues, these stories can provide a complementary, vital data stream, a way of listening to the past through the metaphors a culture chooses to remember. The Ainu tradition of Yukar, their epic poetry, often describes a world shaped by kami, spiritual beings, with narratives deeply tied to the sea, forests, and mountains of their homeland. Stories of origins from across the water may not chart a precise migration route, but they can reflect a profound cultural memory of arrival by boat, of a time when the ancestors came from somewhere else, embedding that journey into the community's identity. Similarly, the rich oral traditions of the Burushaski people in the Karakoram, filled with tales of heroes and specific mountain peaks, reinforce a timeless connection to that vertical landscape, suggesting a depth of occupation that aligns with the language's ancient roots there. These narratives function as a form of soft historical data. A creation myth that centers on a great flood might resonate with geological evidence of rising sea levels thousands of years ago. A recurring story about a journey from a land of endless cold could hint at ancestral memories of an ice age landscape. The key is in the patterns, the persistent themes that are too specific to be universal archetypes, yet too old to be recent inventions. This approach requires us to value indigenous knowledge systems not as quaint folklore, but as sophisticated historical and philosophical documents. For a community like the Kusunda, whose language is a lexicon of the forest, their stories of the Ban Roger, the kings of the forest, are more than tales. They are a living map of an ecosystem and a way of life, encoding ethical codes for hunting, relationships with animal spirits, and a detailed understanding of botany. This oral library represents a parallel track of preservation, safeguarding environmental and historical knowledge that the language's vocabulary alone implies. By weaving together the hard data of linguistic analysis with the soft, rich data of mythology, we gain a more holistic human picture. The grammar of Basque tells us it is ancient and alone, but the layers of myth and legend within Euskara culture, with their unique deities and cosmological views, paint the portrait of the people who kept that language alive. They tell us what those speakers valued, what they feared, and how they explained their place in a world that constantly sought to absorb them. In this way, the silent structure of an isolate finds its voice in the stories told in that very tongue, offering whispers about a past that pure linguistics can only define as mysterious. A single field of study can only hear part of the conversation. The true breakthrough in understanding these ancient, solitary languages will not come from linguistics alone, nor from genetics or archaeology in isolation. The future belongs to a powerful, interdisciplinary convergence, a weaving together of these separate threads into a single, stronger cord capable of pulling us deeper into the past. Imagine a detective who can only examine the fingerprints, while another only studies the footprints, and a third only listens to the witness accounts. To solve the mystery, they must compare notes. This is precisely the new frontier for research into language isolates. The most promising model is a holistic one, where a single event in deep time is viewed through multiple, simultaneous lenses. Consider a dramatic shift in the ancient climate, like the 4.2 kiloyear event, a period of severe aridification and cooling that swept across vast regions of the world around 4,200 years ago. From the perspective of climate science, this was a planetary shift, but through the lens of human experience, it was a catastrophe that could have emptied valleys and dried up rivers. This climate event becomes the first domino. It might have triggered a migration, as communities were forced to abandon their homelands in search of water and fertile land. This movement of people would leave a trace in the human genome, a genetic signature that population geneticists can now detect by comparing ancient DNA from bones found along the potential migration route. That genetic evidence points to a real, physical movement of individuals. Archaeology then steps in to show us the material reality of these movements. The arrival of these migrants in a new region would be marked by a sudden change in the material record, the appearance of a new pottery style, different burial practices, or novel tool technologies layered over the older ones. This is the tangible footprint of a new culture entering the landscape. Finally, linguistics provides the echo of the social consequence. The language spoken by these incoming migrants, backed by their new technologies and possibly greater numbers, could have gradually displaced the older languages of the indigenous inhabitants. In most places, the old tongue would vanish completely, but in a few remote refuges, perhaps a secluded mountain valley or a dense forest pocket, the original language might hold on, becoming an isolated survivor of that earlier world. In this integrated story, a language isolate is no longer just a linguistic oddity. It is the final piece of evidence in a chain that begins with a changing sky, moves through the bones of ancient people, and is solidified in the clay of their pots. It becomes the key plot point in a chapter of human prehistory written by climate, migration, and cultural encounter. This convergence moves us beyond the limitations of any single discipline. A linguist hitting the wall of time depth can now look to a geneticist's map of ancient ancestry. An archaeologist puzzling over a sudden change in settlement patterns can consult a climatologist's reconstruction of ancient droughts. Each field fills in the gaps the others cannot see. The story that emerges is, of course, still fragmentary. We are piecing together a narrative from clues that are separated by millennia. But it is a far more complete and human story than any one field could tell alone. It acknowledges that a language is not an abstract code floating in the air. It is spoken by people who farm and hunt, who flee droughts and cross mountains, who adopt new tools and sometimes, against all odds, cling to the old words. The future of unlocking these mysteries lies in this collaborative conversation, where the silent data of a pollen core, the hidden history in a strand of DNA, and the stubborn grammar of a lone language are finally allowed to speak to each other, revealing the epic, interconnected saga of our species. But what happens when the researcher's notebook and recorder arrive in the village? The pursuit of knowledge, especially when it involves the world's most vulnerable languages, carries a profound ethical weight that transcends pure science. This is not a neutral excavation of data. It is an encounter with living people and their most intimate cultural property, their voice. The relationship between a linguist and a small community speaking an isolate is inherently unequal, built on a foundation of power, access, and potential vulnerability. The researcher arrives with resources, institutional backing, and a specific goal. The community holds a treasure they may not have asked to be studied, a way of speaking that is woven into their identity, their history, and their daily life. This dynamic demands a framework of responsibility that places the community's well-being and autonomy at the very center of the work. The first and most critical principle is informed consent. This goes far beyond a signed form in a language the signers may not fully understand. It is an ongoing, transparent conversation. A linguist must explain, in terms the community can genuinely grasp, what the research involves. What will be recorded? Who will have access to the recordings? How might the materials be used in the future, in academic papers, in online archives, or in language learning apps? The community has a right to know these details and to give, or withhold, their permission based on a clear understanding. This process respects their right to control their own cultural narrative. Closely tied to consent is the crucial question of data ownership. Who truly owns the stories, the songs, the words that are documented? For too long, the default assumption was that the data belonged to the university or the researcher who collected it, stored in an archive far away. The ethical model today insists that the primary ownership remains with the community. The recordings, the dictionaries, the transcribed texts are not trophies to be taken. They are a shared heritage to be stewarded. This means creating copies for the community, storing materials in accessible formats they can use, and ensuring they have a decisive voice in how and when their language is shared with the wider world. Without this, the work risks becoming a form of extraction where knowledge is mined and removed, leaving little of lasting value behind. The ultimate aim must be a genuine partnership, one that offers tangible benefits back to the community. A linguist's role can transform from that of an extractor to that of a facilitator. This might involve collaborating to create practical resources the community has identified as a need, such as illustrated children's books in the language, school curricula for younger generations, or digital tools that help speakers connect. It could mean training community members in documentation techniques themselves, empowering them to continue the work on their own terms. In cases of language revitalization, the linguist can offer technical expertise on language teaching methods, while the community provides the cultural knowledge and social drive. This reciprocity ensures the work strengthens the community's own efforts to maintain their linguistic heritage. This ethical framework is not a bureaucratic hurdle, it is the moral core of the endeavor. These languages are not mere specimens in a jar, fascinating fossils for academic dissection. They are the living, breathing heritage of people with names, families, and hopes for the future. Their words carry the weight of ancestors, the wisdom of the land, and the identity of a people. To study them without this deep respect is to repeat the patterns of the past, where outside interests treated cultures as curiosities to be catalogued and then forgotten. The principle is clear: the work must do no harm. It must avoid creating conflict within the community. It must protect the privacy of individuals, and it must never treat the language or its speakers as exotic objects. Every recording, every interview, every published paper is part of a relationship. And the most important finding of any ethical fieldwork is not a new verb tense or a list of rare words, but the trust earned and the legacy of a collaboration that honored the voices it sought to understand. A mysterious, untranslatable script or a lone survivor tongue has a unique power to ignite the public imagination. We see it in best-selling novels where a fictional language isolate holds the key to an ancient conspiracy, in documentaries that promise to unveil the world's oldest language, and in video games where deciphering a lost script is the central puzzle to save humanity. This widespread fascination is more than just entertainment. It taps into a deep, almost primal curiosity about our origins and the secrets our ancestors might have left behind in their words. There is a compelling romance to the idea of a code that no one can crack, a voice from a time before history that speaks only to us. This cultural spotlight is in many ways a tremendous gift. It brings these obscure linguistic mysteries out of academic journals and into living rooms, generating public interest and, crucially, funding for real scientific expeditions and preservation projects. Awareness is the first step toward action, and a captivated audience can become a powerful advocate for protecting these fragile threads of human heritage. Yet, this very fascination carries a subtle risk. The allure of the mystery can sometimes outpace the patience required for the truth. In the race for a compelling narrative, complex, incremental science can be overshadowed by sensational claims. A tenuous hypothesis about a language's origins might be presented as a proven fact, or a fictionalized account might blur the lines of reality for a viewer. Unverified theories about global ancient languages or fantastical lost civilizations can spread rapidly, often framed with more confidence than the evidence warrants. This creates a double-edged sword. The wonder that draws people in can, if not engaged critically, lead to a misunderstanding of what these languages truly represent. They are not portals to alien visitors or proof of a single global superculture. They are the human-scale records of specific communities, their resilience, and their deep connection to place. The challenge, then, is to channel this public curiosity in a productive direction. We can appreciate the profound sense of wonder these mysteries evoke, the thrill of the unsolved puzzle, while also demanding the rigor of the scientific process. When you encounter a story about a language isolate, ask gentle questions. Are the claims being made by credentialed linguists or archaeologists, or are they from other sources? Is the evidence presented as a definitive revelation or as a piece of an ongoing, collaborative investigation? This critical engagement does not diminish the magic, it deepens it. It transforms passive consumption into an active partnership in discovery. Ultimately, this global fascination is a resource, a vast reservoir of interest that can be directed toward genuine support. The public that is captivated by a fictionalized account of a lost language can be guided to support the organizations doing the real, unglamorous work of documentation, to appreciate the cultural context behind the mystery, and to understand that preserving a living language is about sustaining a community, not just solving a riddle. This informed enthusiasm becomes a force multiplier, ensuring that the world's most solitary voices are not just celebrated as plot devices, but heard and safeguarded as the irreplaceable human treasures they are. The greatest discoveries are not always the answers we find, but the questions we learn to ask. Our journey across mountains and through time, listening for the echoes of Basque, Burushaski, Kusunda, and so many other solitary voices, ultimately leads us to a quiet, humbling frontier. For many of these ancient languages, we may never uncover a definitive origin story. The connections have been severed by a depth of time so profound it lies beyond the reach of even our most advanced tools. The comparative method hits a wall, genetics offers clues but not conclusions, and archaeology presents silent artifacts. The evidence is simply too sparse, eroded by millennia. And sitting with that reality, we realize something profound that is perfectly okay. There is an immense value in the mystery itself. These linguistic puzzles do not represent a failure of science, but a testament to its honesty. They mark the boundary of our understanding, a frontier that keeps our curiosity alive. To declare every mystery solved would be to close the book on human prehistory, to assume we have mapped every contour of our past. These isolated languages stand as permanent reminders that our maps are incomplete. They are living monuments to the vast, uncharted territories of the human story, to the countless communities, migrations, and cultural experiments that flourished and faded without leaving a clear trace in our genealogies. They whisper of the stories forever lost, the epic poems never written down, the jokes, lullabies, and wisdom that evaporated when the last speaker fell silent. This unresolved quality forces a necessary humility. In a world that often demands clear answers and linear narratives, these languages insist on complexity. They defy our desire to neatly categorize every aspect of human experience into known families and familiar patterns. Their very existence is a statement that the human past was far messier, far more diverse, and far more interesting than any single narrative can contain. They challenge the notion that history belongs only to the victors, to the cultures that spread widely and left written records. Instead, they grant a form of quiet immortality to the ones who stayed, who persisted in their remote valleys and forests, guarding a unique way of seeing the world until the very end. So we are left not with a solution, but with an invitation. These languages do not ask to be solved and filed away. They ask us to keep listening, to keep questioning. They spark a continuous, generative curiosity that drives new interdisciplinary collaborations, refines our technologies, and deepens our respect for the sheer diversity of the human mind. Each one is a beacon pointing toward the dark, unknown waters of our collective past, reminding us that for every lineage we can trace, there may be a dozen others whose light has gone out, leaving only a single, stubborn point of brilliance behind. Their legacy is not a genealogical chart, but a perpetual sense of wonder, a quiet acknowledgement that some of the most beautiful chapters of our story are written in a language we are still learning how to read. We have traversed continents and millennia, from the Basque country to the Andaman Islands, exploring languages that stand as solitary sentinels of forgotten epochs. These isolated ancient languages are more than academic curiosities. They are living testaments to human resilience, a quiet proof that a community's voice can echo for thousands of years against the tides of change. They are monuments to our species' incredible diversity, showing us that the human mind can structure reality in ways that feel utterly alien, yet are perfectly logical within their own world. Most of all, they are windows into the profound, shadowy depths of our shared history, hinting at chapters for which we have no other written record. Each one, from the melodic complexity of Burushaski to the forest whisper of Kusunda, challenges the neat models we try to impose on the past. They refuse to fit into our family trees, forcing historians, linguists, geneticists, and archaeologists to talk to one another, to weave their separate threads of evidence into a stronger, more humble story. This interdisciplinary conversation is perhaps their greatest gift to modern science, a reminder that the biggest mysteries cannot be solved from a single room of study. In their very fragility, these languages also hold up a mirror to the delicate tapestry of human culture. They show us that a way of seeing the world, refined over countless generations, can rest in the memory of a single elder, and that its passing is a loss for all of humanity. This understanding fuels the urgent, respectful work of documentation and revitalization, efforts that are less about preserving a relic and more about honoring a continuing legacy. As we support these endeavors, we carry forward a spirit of deep inquiry and profound respect. The scientific search for genealogical connections may continue for centuries, yielding faint clues and tantalizing possibilities. But perhaps we should also learn to listen to what these languages say in their very solitude. Their enduring mystery is not a void, but a presence. It speaks to the vast, unknown landscapes of our prehistory, to the richness of human experience that has vanished beyond the horizon of memory, and to the stubborn, beautiful will of communities to hold onto their identity. They remind us that some of the most important stories are not those told by conquerors, but those whispered by survivors. If this journey into the unknown depths of human speech has intrigued you, there are countless other historical puzzles waiting to be explored. Consider subscribing for more deep dives into the enigmas that shape our understanding of the past. And we would love to hear from you which of these solitary linguistic sentinels, from Basque to the language of the Sentinelese, fascinates you the most. Share your thoughts in the comments below.